Hi everyone, I'm Carrie Cole with Side by Side Educational Consulting, where we work side by side with educators to increase literacy outcomes for all kids. This video is going to be about effective lesson planning with strong beginnings, and we're really going to hone in on this idea of strong beginnings through bell ringers. So what is a bell ringer? A bell ringer is basically a warm-up activity that prioritizes instructional time because it gets kids started on the learning before you even start teaching. A few things to think about with bell ringers. It's the first academic task of the class, so it really sets the stage and sets the tone for what's about to come up. The next thing to think about is students start working on it as soon as they enter the class. They're not waiting for the bell to ring. They're not waiting for directions from the teacher. They know exactly what to do at the moment they walk into that door. And because of that, time is effectively used. The third thing to think about is that it's maybe short on length, but it's a long on value. It's really getting kids primed for the lesson, getting them warmed up and ready for the content ahead. The last thing to think about is that not all bell ringers are created equal. So you're really wanting to look at bell ringers that are going to be rigorous and a good use of instructional time. You don't want bell ringers to be seen by students as being busy work. You want it to be connected to the learning that either happened in prior days or the learning that's coming up, that you're previewing learning that's going to be ahead. Keeping all of those things in mind, let's look at 5 principles for creating effective bell ringers. The first principle of an effective bell ringer is that it's posted in the same place every day. Consistency builds habit. So this idea that it's always on this place on the board. Students always know that that's where they look to begin their bell ringer, or it's a written task that's on their desk every day when they walk in, so then they know that that's always where they go for their bell ringer. Whatever it is, it needs to be something that's consistent, that students don't have to ask what they're supposed to do when they walk in. They know immediately what the routine is when they walk in the door. The second principle of creating an effective bell ringer is that it's independent. So you want to ensure that whatever you're asking them to do is going to be something that they can complete independently. If it's something that they have a lot of questions about, it's not independent enough. So you want to make sure that it's something that's either been taught previously or you're going to preview it, but it's something that they can really do on their own in terms of thinking about their learning. So independence is key in an effective bell ringer. The third principle for an effective bell ringer is ensuring that you keep it brief. So bell ringers are just a warm-up. That's what you want to think of it as. It's just a way to get kids warmed up, get them thinking about the content that was maybe taught yesterday or maybe the content that's coming up today. But it should only take about 3 to 5 minutes. You don't want it taking too long because you don't want it taking away from the instructional time that you need to teach the important work that's coming up that day. The fourth principle of an effective bell ringer is to show your thinking in writing. So you really want kids to complete their bell ringer somehow through a written task. It increases accountability, and it also gives you an opportunity to see their thinking. While they're completing their bell ringer, you can be monitoring the class, getting a sense of where kids are at. This is giving you really great formative information in terms of whether you're ready to move on to the next part of the lesson that you have planned, or if you need to do a quick little review before you do that. It also gives you an opportunity when you can see the answers and what kids are thinking in their writing. It gives you an opportunity as the teacher to provide feedback, actionable feedback. So letting kids know, here's what you're doing well, here's what I need you to do next. Think about it this way. It gives kids an opportunity it gives you an opportunity to correct kids' learning right in the moment and gives them an opportunity to be successful. The last principle of an effective bell ringer, or the fifth principle that we're going to look at for creating those effective bell ringers, is going to be that you use your bell ringer strategically for a preview or review of information. I've been talking about that. That's really important so that your bell ringers don't just turn into busy work, but you're using them strategically to get a sense of, for review, whether students remember what was taught previously, and if there's anything that you need to go back and reteach, or for preview purposes, giving them a jump start on some of the thinking that's going to be coming up, giving them an opportunity to brainstorm and maybe connect to some important concepts before you get into them. So use those bell ringers strategically to preview and review. So here's one example of a bell ringer that was in an elementary classroom, and this bell ringer was reviewing, so the focus was review, a spelling sort that kids had been doing around short E and long E words spelled with EA. So the students had to take those spelling words from the week with that specific phonics focus and sort the words into the correct category. Here's another example of a bell ringer that's a writing task that was used in a classroom. So this task is reviewing some critical vocabulary that was taught in a unit around Martin Luther King Jr. And you can see those vocabulary words: prejudice, civil rights movement, freedom, and arrest. And what the students were having to do was create sentences, different sentence types, a statement, question, explanation, and command using those vocabulary words. Great review of information that had been previously taught. Another really great bell ringer are because, but, so sentences. These can be used over and over and over again for different types of contents. It comes from the Writing Revolution, which is a great resource for how to teach writing better in classrooms. But these because, but, so sentences can be incorporated into any content, and it's a great way for kids to really apply what they've been learning. And the example that you'll see here is actually a math example. So you can see students are having to complete the sentences based on what they've learned so far about fractions. So we have fractions are like decimals because. Fractions are like decimals but. And fractions are like decimals so. Remember, when we talk about fractions are like decimals because, kids are having to explain the thinking behind that. Fractions are like decimals but, when you have the but in there, that's having kids make a kind of like a U-turn and do a compare and contrast. And fractions are like decimals so is more of a cause and showing cause and effect sentence. You could do a bell ringer incorporating all three of those sentence types with because, but, so, or you could do a bell ringer where you're just doing one of those at a time, depending on what level your kids are at in their practice with those because, but, so stems. Another bell ringer that would work great for ELA would be to identify the following from yesterday's text selection. So again, this is a review activity, but kids would have to go back into the text that had been read, perhaps a short story, identify the main characters, setting, problem, solution, and then the more difficult one, which is theme. Great practice for them to do and kind of get their mind back into what was taught the previous day. The last example of a bell ringer that I'm going to share with you today is another vocabulary example that, again, because vocabulary could be reinforced across any content area. But you can see the two questions that are being asked here, and these questions could be recycled and used from week to week with different vocabulary words. But the first question to get kids started on that bell ringer is to define the word, in this case autonomy. So that's from yesterday's vocabulary study. So define autonomy. Kids would have already had that information presented and taken notes on it, so they're having to go back into that, their notes, and make sure that they can define it and remember that from yesterday. And then having them expand on that a little bit, and this is a little bit of a preview of what's coming up. The root auto means self, so looking at the root of autonomy, build a list of words with the root auto, getting kids to start to brainstorm around some of that vocabulary. So I hope you can take some of these great examples for bell ringers to your classrooms and ensure that you're getting your lessons started in effective ways. Thanks for watching.